Alright, seeing as how I neglected to provide enough videos over the weekend, due to us taking a break then, I will instead provide a look at the Constitution. If hopefully I can find the key. That's the here you go. 124. What we're gonna do is look through these, specifically the amendments first, and I'm going to explain them to the best of my ability. Now, officially, other people have made their stances on it clear, but I'll give my own since I believe them to be correct. Kinda how that works. Amendment number 1. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble, petition the government for redress of grievances. Now, the first law does not mean there should be no religion in politics, but it means no establishment of a religion, or to stop a person from freely believing whatever religion they wish. The importance of this difference is, it allows religion in politics, but it does not allow the establishment of, say, the American Lutheran Church or whatever church we would wish to establish. So if, say, a big theocratic movement rose in the United States, we're not allowed to make our own little Protestant church, but we are allowed to speak of religion in relation to politics. In the free exercise, fairly simple. You can't stop someone from freely practicing their religion unless it conflicts with someone else's rights. Next is the abridging of the freedom of speech, press, and peaceful assembly. Freedom of speech, fairly obvious. You're allowed to speak your mind. Now, the official stance of the government is that, under certain circumstances, they can't take that away. I don't fully agree with that, but if we're going to have to abide by government rules, then place, time, and circumstance are allowed to be used to justify not giving such a right. So, for example, if I want to make a speech in the middle of DC denouncing a politician currently in office, I could have my license to do so revoked. Meaning, if I apply for a license or some other permit to do it, they can say, nope, we don't wish to because we're worried about place and time and stopping government functions. The press is largely the same. If it's a secret document, the government's allowed to say, you can't publish that. However, as a Supreme Court case with Nixon and the New York Times proved, if it's already published, can't do anything about it. So, for example, the Pentagon Papers, they are perfectly legal. And then the right of the people to peaceably assemble means that you're allowed to protest, start an assembly to argue against something, for something, whatever. But it must be peaceful. What that means is, for example, I could protest as long as I wanted, down the street, about some random thing. Maybe it's the lack of dogs in the neighborhood, whatever. But the moment someone starts enacting violence, it is fully within the government's right to just say, nope, none of that, we're done. This is further reinforced by Brandenburg v. Ohio, which allowed for a Klan rally to occur, despite the fact that, they're the Klan, because there was no immediate violent action that would be caused by the assembly and the speech. Similar happened with the National Socialists, or let's just call them Nazis, who wished to parade in a predominantly Jewish neighborhood. The ACLU defended them and protected their right to do so. And then to petition the government for a redress of grievances. What this means is fairly obvious. If you have an issue with how the government's currently running things, you can petition them to change that. So, if the government fired you, like a lot of people recently did, then you can go to a bunch of other people, say, hey, we'd like to petition, get everyone to sign on, and then they can send something to the government. Now, that doesn't mean that the government has to accept. You're just allowed to do it. Which means you can send it to them. They are under no obligation to fulfill whatever you petition for. Second Amendment. A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Fairly obvious here. Militias are civilian. They are not professional militaries. So a bunch of civilians getting together to form a military unit for the sake of protecting their country, which we did actually for a long time rely on a militia system for our military. So it's basically saying we need militias and they need to be prepared for fighting. So, since it's necessary to preserve our state, the right of the people, think citizens, to keep and bear arms, to own and use guns, shall not be infringed, cannot be touched. What this means is, gun control is illegal. Because the ability to own an arm and use it cannot be stopped unless it violates the rights of another. Meaning, if you were to say try to shoot someone, that would be illegal, and they can take away your gun. Because you, by keeping and bearing arms, are violating someone else's rights. But, being able to say, by even a 50 cal, taking it down to the range and firing it, perfectly legal, because you're not infringing on others' rights. And this is important to the militia point, because if everyone's allowed to own and use their guns, then the civilian militias they form will therefore be more effective. Third Amendment. No soldier shall, in time of peace, be quartered in any house without the consent of the owner, nor in time of war, but in a manner prescribed by a law. What this means is, you can't shove soldiers in people's houses and just say, feed them. Which was a real thing that Britain did at the time, hence why it's Amendment number 3. Because there weren't enough barracks, they would often send soldiers into colonists' houses to be provided food, rations, and everything else. Not as relevant in the modern day, but still important because, for example, if during a draft we get, let's say, another 1 million soldiers and they don't have enough barracks room for them, then the government can't just send them to civilians' homes without express permission or a bill by Congress or whatever. It all depends. Amendment number 4. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, paper, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. This is our unreasonable search and seizure amendment, and what it means is essentially, if you want to look into someone's pockets because you think they have a knife that was not allowed for them to have, then you'd have to go to the court, say, we would like to search this person to make sure they don't have a knife that we have made illegal, say a switchblade or whatever. And the court must say, sure, before looking through, and you cannot use false pretense to judge things. Which means, if you don't find that knife, but you do find something else illegal, like let's say you find weed, and in that state weed is not allowed, you cannot use that as justification to arrest them anyways, because your warrant is specifically for the potential of a weapon that is illegal. Now, if you find the weapon and the weed, yes, because then you can say, it wasn't just the knife that we asked for, it was this too, whole thing. But Up, in, up until the point where that is reached, you cannot search them. So if you don't go to the courts and get permission, you cannot search. The only exception is schools and lockers, because that is considered school property, so they are allowed to search so long as they can argue they had probable cause. Student reports that there was someone with weed or something else on campus, perfectly legal to search their locker to check, regardless of consent or anything else. Amendment number 5. No person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces or in the militia when in actual service in time of war or public danger, nor shall any person be subjected to the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb, nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. So this is basically combining a lot of things into one. The first one is matter of grand juries. Capital means death. So, for example, capital punishment is execution. What this means is if it's a felony or one where you can be killed as punishment, then you must have a grand jury, except in cases arising in the Army, Navy, or civilian militias during wartime. Now, the reason they specify this is because the Army and Navy have their own courts, and the militia, unless actively raised, is still treated as civilian. So if, for example, an officer does something bad, like, let's say, murders someone, that's up to the Army courts to deal with it. Now, how bad they do it, it depends, but that is how this is broken up. Next is the matter of same offense twice. This is double jeopardy. What this means is, let's say I am charged with stealing an apple, and I am proven innocent. They cannot then say, you stole this apple again, and put me on trial for that. And so, when it comes down to it, double jeopardy just means you can't be charged with the same offense twice, and it does mean same offense. If I was charged with stealing the apple and I was found innocent, and then 2 weeks later I am charged with stealing a banana, well, because it's not the same offense, because it's a different item I supposedly stole, I can be charged. It is only if I try to steal that exact same apple again that I cannot be charged, because they already tried me for that, and it was proven for me to be innocent. Even if it's not, still same principle. And the final one, well, not final, but next is the matter of testifying against yourself. This is one of the Miranda rights that police are allowed to, not just allowed, required to tell you. This is because, for a lot of courts, in the past especially, testifying against yourself was a very common way to basically force someone into an arrest. Torture them enough and they'll say, yeah, I did it, I don't want to go through this anymore. So, by putting this in place, you cannot force someone to do so. And finally is the matter of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. What this means is you cannot seize someone's assets or take their life without being convicted of a crime first. Now, once that's done, you absolutely can. For example, if someone is charged with murder, they are fully within their legal rights to be executed. Because if due process of law has occurred, well then, it's a matter of innocent until proven guilty. Once they've proven guilt, then it's punishment for the offense, whatever that offense may be. Similarly, if someone stole, the government's fully within their rights to seize the assets of said person to compensate those who lost their property. And the government, of course, for wasting your time. And finally, up here, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. That's eminent domain. What this means is, effectively, the government can still take your property. They just have to compensate you for it. So they have to send a dude who says, all right, the property we're trying to seize is worth insert money here. As long as the government pays up, yeah, that property is now theirs. It's commonly used with roads, especially in poor communities, because that land's cheaper, but it's just a general thing that the government's allowed to do. Number 6. In all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial by impartial jury of the state and district wherein the crime shall have been committed, which district shall have been previously ascertained by law, and to be informed of the nature and cause of the accusation, to be confronted with the witnesses against him, to have compulsory process for obtaining witnesses in his favor, and to have the assistance of counsel for his defense. This is another one of the Miranda rights. Well, some of this is, but also it's just general rules for how to handle witnesses and trials. What this means is, number 1, you can't stall a trial because you think you're going to lose. The trials must occur in a relatively speedy manner. Depends on your definition of speedy, but yeah. And it must be a public trial, meaning it can't be behind closed doors. Supreme Court, since it's not dealing with criminal prosecutions, can ignore this, but if your local court is having a trial, you are allowed to sit in, because it's a public trial, unless there's some reason to exclude you. Next is the matter of impartial jury of the state and district wherein the crime shall have been committed. What this means is, it goes to the county. Say you commit a crime in a neighboring county, it'll be those people trying you and not people from the county in which you currently reside. Furthermore, impartial jury just means, in effect, that both lawyers, prosecution and defense, are able to weed out any potential jurors that they believe will have a conflict of interest. So if it's a case involving a racially motivated crime, you probably don't want on the jury someone who is a promoter of said crime or despises the people doing it. So the prosecution and defense are effectively able to say, you there who showed up for jury duty, you can be dismissed. You are not going to handle this trial because we believe it's a conflict of interest. And then, as for another one, so the ascertained by law just means they know where it's been committed, and so they judge based on that. Next is the information of the nature and cause of the accusation. Basically means, well, it's very straightforward actually. You gotta know what you're being tried for. They can't just say, oh, you're being tried without saying of what crime. So if they're trying you for, let's say for the sake of ease, assault, they gotta tell you that it's assault if you ask. And then to be confronted with the witnesses against him means they're allowed to speak to the witnesses and cross-examine them. So they can't do what the British used to do, for example, which was if you interrupted court, they would dismiss you and not allow you to make your own case. You gotta be in the room. And then finally, to have compulsory process for obtaining witnesses in his favor and to have assistance of counsel for his defense. What this means is they can subpoena a witness to say, hey, you gotta show up to court, we need you to testify in favor of the witness. And the assistance of counsel means, for often pro bono, a lawyer must be able to serve you. So if you cannot buy a lawyer, let's say you can't pay one, the state must provide one for you. Number 7. In suits at common law, where the value in controversy shall exceed $20, not adjusted for inflation, the right of trial by jury shall be preserved, and no fact tried by a jury shall be otherwise re-examined in any court of the United States than according to the rules of the common law. Common law is an English practice, and it was commonly done at the state or local level. So, for things like theft and the like, you would have rules about it that said, here's theft, here's the rules regarding it, like is it a misdemeanor, felony, and the like, the punishments, and all sorts of things. So, theft, assault, same principle. As long as it doesn't escalate, it will still be under common law, or as long as it's not against the federal government. And what this means is, if they believe that it's worth $20, whatever you did, course, now it's much higher because inflation happened. Then you shall have the right to a trial by jury, and you're not allowed to have it re-examined except based on the rules of your local or state entity who is currently trying you. Number 8. Excessive bail shall not be required, no excessive fines imposed, no cruel and unusual punishments inflicted. What this means is, as punishment for crimes, the bail cannot be unreasonable, the fines imposed cannot be out of justification for the situation, and cruel and unusual punishments cannot be used. Now, these are vague because how someone defines excessive bail, excessive fines, and cruel and unusual punishment are different. For example, there are some people who argue that the death penalty is cruel and unusual punishment. I would disagree because, 1, unusual implies it's weird, or otherwise not common. Death penalty was, and still is, a very notable punishment, and is definitely not unusual. Cruel, saves them time to suffer, so I'd argue it's actually the least cruel option. And then an excessive fines imposed, so you can't be charged $80,000 for speeding. Excessive bail means you can't be charged $2 million for bail. Fairly straightforward. It's just vague, so someone might argue $8 million is excessive, $10,000 is excessive. Maybe they'll even argue that $20 million is perfectly reasonable. Who knows? Some people are like that. Next is Amendment Number 9. The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others restrained by the people. What this means is, if it's not listed here, that does not mean you don't have that right. The right to privacy is a common example, but truthfully, there are a number of rights, like property rights, which fall under this. What it means is, in the shadow or penumbra of these other laws, you still have your other rights. It's just we're not writing them all because we can't, because we're focused on these, and so they shall not be mentioned. Next is Amendment Number 10. Powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. What this means is, if it isn't listed in the Constitution to the United States and it's not passed as a law that's deemed necessary and proper, then the rights and powers delegated must go to the states or the people. So, for example, roads are generally built by the states because unless the U.S. government actively intervenes, generally speaking, that falls to the states. Same with private enterprise. That's left to the people. The government cannot say, all right, we're going to manage your store now. Now that we've gone through the first 10, the Bill of Rights, let us move on to the other amendments. Number 11. The judicial power of the United States shall not be construed to extend to any suit in law or equity commenced or prosecuted against one of the United States by citizens of another state or by citizens or subjects of any foreign state. So, what this means is the judicial power of the U.S., so the government, shall not be construed to extend to any suit in law or equity commenced or prosecuted against one of the states, one of the states, this is very specific, by citizens of another state or by citizens or subjects of any foreign state. So, if it's a disagreement between people in two separate states, that does not mean that the federal government has a say. Or, I believe, given the phrasing, it's probably in reference to the actual states. This one's a bit poorly phrased, mainly because with how we use United States now, that's referring to the federal government. However, the United States used to be considered multiple, so they would often use these instead, which creates some issues when reading. But basically means it's under whoever is dealing with it at the time. So if it's a conflict between states, federal government handles it. If it's a conflict between people of different states, usually is handled in whatever state the crime was committed. Not saying it for fact, because this one was not for me to read, but generally speaking, that's how it works. Number 12. The electors shall meet in their respective states and vote by ballot for president and vice president, one of whom, at least, shall not be inhabited of the same state with themselves. They shall name in their ballots the person they voted for as president, and in distinct ballots the person voted for as vice president, and they shall make distinct lists of all persons voted for as president and all of persons for as vice president, and the number of votes for each, which lists they shall sign and certify, the transmit sealed to the seat of the government in the United States, directed to the President of the Senate. The President of the Senate shall, in the presence of the Senate and the House of Representatives, open all the certificates, and the votes shall then be counted. The person having the greatest number of votes for president shall be the president. If such a number be a majority of the whole number of electors appointed, and if no person have such a majority, then from the persons having the highest numbers, not exceeding 3 on the list of those voted for as president, the House of Representatives shall choose immediately by ballot the president. But in choosing the president, the votes shall be taken by states, the representatives from each state having one vote. A quorum for this purpose shall consist of a member or members from 2/3 of the states, and a majority of all states shall be necessary to a choice. And if the House of Representatives shall not choose a president, whenever the right of choice shall devolve upon them, for the 4th of March next following, then the vice president shall act as president. As in the case of the death or other constitutional disability of the president, the person having the greatest number of votes as vice president shall be vice president. Such number be a majority of the whole number of electors appointed, and if no person have a majority, then the 2 highest numbers on the list. The Senate shall choose the vice president. A quorum for the purpose shall consist of 2/3 of the whole number of senators, and a majority of the whole number shall be necessary to a choice. No person constitutionally ineligible for the office of president shall be eligible for that of the vice president of the United States. Very long-winded way of setting up our electoral process for the president. Because before, you were often given 2 votes for president and vice president. They just merged it into 1 vote for the sake of ease. But it also sets up the succession. So if the president dies or is otherwise incapacitated, the vice president shall be the acting president until it is resolved. So, for example, if Trump were to, say, have a seizure and no longer be able to serve as president, then J.D. Vance would pick it up until he recovers, or in the case where he dies, Trump dies, then Vance becomes the president. Also, very long, definitely. Number 13. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for a crime whereof the party shall be duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any other place under or subject to their jurisdiction. What this means is very simple. Slavery is banned except as a punishment for a crime. So, for example, we can't have antebellum Southerners owning a bunch of black people as slaves. However, as punishment for the crime of doing something stupid, whatever that thing is, the person is allowed to demand labor of you. This is where people say slavery still exists in the U.S. because it kind of does. Now, I wouldn't call it slavery because they usually get paid just a pittance. But regardless, that is how it is. And Section 2 is just Congress shall have the power to enforce this. Amendment 14, a package deal. It's going to be long. So, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. Next, representatives shall be apportioned among the several states according to their respective numbers, counting the whole number of persons in each state, excluding Indians not taxed. But when the right to vote at any election for the choice of electors for President and Vice President of the United States, representatives in Congress, the executive and judicial officers of a state, or those of the legislature thereof, is denied to any male inhabitant of such state, being 21 years of age and citizens of the U.S., or in any way abridged, except for participation in rebellion or other crime, The basis of representation therein shall be reduced in the proportion which number of such male citizens shall bear to the whole number of male citizens 21 years of age in such a state. No person shall be a senator or representative of Congress, or elector, president or vice president, or hold any office, civil and military, under the United States or under any state, having previously taken an oath as a member of Congress or as an officer of the United States, or as any member of a state legislature, or as an executive or judicial officer of any state, to support the Constitution of the United States, shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same, or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof. But Congress may, by a vote of 2/3 of each house, remove such disability. The validity of public debt of the United States, authorized by law, including debts incurred for the payment of pensions and bounties for services in suppressing insurrection or rebellion, shall not be questioned. Neither the United States nor any state shall assume or pay any debt or obligation incurred in aid of insurrection or rebellion against the United States, or any claim for the loss or emancipation of any slave, but all such debts, obligations, and claims shall be held illegal and void, and then Congress shall have the power to enforce by appropriate legislation. The first part means that all people born in the U.S. are U.S. citizens. This is by soil right. And because of them being citizens, you cannot abridge any rights they have. So, First Amendment, Second Amendment, Third Amendment all still apply. Second is the matter of male suffrage. What this meant is black people in particular, because this was written after the Civil War, are allowed to vote. Now, it's worth noting, it was only moved down to age of 18 later on, so as a result, women and those under 21 were excluded, alongside Indians, because they hadn't been given citizenship yet. As a matter of fact, Indians only got citizenship in the 1920s. Next is the matter of the whole insurrection bit. What this means is, should someone who, having previously given an oath, specifically as a member of Congress, an officer of the United States, member of a legislature, executive or judicial officer, to support the Constitution, they cannot run for Senate, representative, or as an elector, or at any office relating to the United States, or in any state, if they have committed insurrection or rebellion, or aided either. However, should Congress vote and declare that they should no longer be held to that, they can. It's just 2/3. As a matter of fact, that 2/3 is very useful because quite a lot of old Confederates were reintegrated into the United States because of it. However, insurrection and rebellion is the key here. If a dude riots, then technically they can still run for president. It does not matter if they're a senator or not. If it does not qualify as an insurrection or a rebellion, or aid of said insurrection or rebellion, then this section does not apply. The next one is just a matter of debts. Because both sides took debt to finance the war, the U.S. was effectively saying, all the debts we took out, still legal, but all the ones the Confederacy or the states under it took out to fight the war, we're not paying for that, and no one really argued because the U.S. was busy dealing with its own things, and so was most of the rest of the world. Especially France, who was busy in Mexico for some reason. Amendment 15. The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or... Yep, that's the right one. To vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous conditions of servitude. Congress shall enforce by appropriate legislation. Black people are allowed to vote, and you can't say, well, because they're race, they're not allowed to. They are still protected. This reinforces the matter of voting in the 14th Amendment and continues forward. Next, on to the progressive amendments. Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes on incomes from whatever source derived, without apportionment among the several states, and without regard to any census, or enumeration. This just gave the government the power to raise an income tax that was permanent. We had a few income taxes before, but the permanent one was established under this. Next is the matter of Amendment 17. The Senate of the United States shall be composed of 2 senators from each state elected by the people thereof for 6 years, and each senator shall have 1 vote. The election in each state shall have the qualifications requisite for electors of the most numerous branch of state legislatures. This allowed the people to vote on senators. Previously, state governments selected it. So, if, for example, Kansas became, let's say, Republican after an election, for the senators who are up for re-election, it wouldn't be an election, they'd just appoint it. This allowed for a lot of political bargaining, and so in order to reduce that, the direct election of senators was enacted. When vacancies happen in the representation of any state in the Senate, the executive authority of such state shall issue writs of election to fill such vacancies, provided that the legislature of any state may empower the executive thereof to make temporary appointments until the people fill the vacancies by election as the legislature may direct. This amendment shall not be so construed as to affect the election or term of any senator chosen before it becomes valid as part of the Constitution. So that's a thing saying it's not retroactive, and as for this, what it means is, should a Senate seat be vacant, the state's allowed to say, alright, we're going to hold an election for the new senator, we'll see who wins. And they're allowed to appoint someone temporarily in case of votes going on to vote on important bills. Next is amendment number 17. After 1 year from the ratification of this article, the manufacture, sale, or transportation of intoxicating liquors within, the importation thereof into, or exportation thereof from the United States and all territories subject to the jurisdiction thereof for beverage purposes is hereby prohibited. The Congress and the several states shall have concurrent power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. This article shall be inoperative unless it shall have been ratified as an amendment to the Constitution by the legislatures of the several states as provided in the Constitution within 7 years from the date of the submission hereof to the states by Congress. What this means is simple. Prohibition is now legally allowed to be put on the books. So, what this meant is, because it's right here, ratification, you are allowed to pass a prohibition law now. They did not just use this for prohibition. That was a matter of a separate act. I believe the Volstead Act. This just said it was legally allowed to be passed. Because otherwise it would fall under a different thing. Next, the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or any state on the basis of sex. Congress shall have the power to enforce by any person. It's just women's suffrage. Very simple. Section 1 for Amendment 20. This is about the New Deal era. The terms of the President and Vice President shall end at noon on the 20th day of January. The terms of Senators and Representatives at noon on the 3rd day of January of the years in such terms would have ended if this article had not been ratified, and the terms of their successors shall then begin. The Congress shall assemble at least once every 30 year, and such meeting shall begin at noon on the 3rd day of January, unless they shall by law appoint a different day. If at the time fixed for the beginning of the term, the president shall elect shall have died, the vice president elect shall become president. If a president shall not have been chosen before the time fixed for the beginning of this term, or the president elect shall have failed to qualify, the vice president elect shall act as president until a president shall have qualified, and Congress may by law provide for the case wherein neither a president nor elect nor a vice president elect shall have qualified, declaring who shall then act as president, or the manner in which one who is to act shall be selected. And such person shall act accordingly until a president or vice president shall have qualified. Congress may by law provide for the case of the death of any of the persons from whom the House of Representatives may choose a president whenever the right of choice shall have devolved upon them, and for the case of the death of any of the persons from whom the Senate may choose a vice president, whenever the right of choice shall be devolved upon them. Sections 1 and 2 shall take effect the 15th day of October following the ratification of this article. This article shall be inoperative unless it shall have been certified. So this just means the rules for how it works. What this means, among other things and being wordy, is that they're shifting over the days. Previously it was March, they moved it to January under FDR. More than that, they're setting more rules for how the president and vice president shall work, so if the president-elect dies before inauguration, then the vice president-elect shall become president when the time comes. Along with other rules, fairly straightforward, wordy but straightforward. 21. The 18th article of the amendment to the Constitution of the United States is hereby repealed. Transportation or importation into any state, territory, or possession of the United States for delivery and use therein of intoxicating liquors in violation of the laws thereof is hereby prohibited. The article shall be inoperative unless it shall have been passed, with all the rules applied. Now it's just the repeal of prohibition. Fairly straightforward there too. Alright, next. No person shall be elected to the office of president more than twice, and no person who has held the office of president or acted as president for more than 2 years of a term to which some other person was elected president shall be elected to the office of the president more than once. But this article shall not apply to any person holding the office of president when this article was proposed by the Congress, and shall not prevent any person who may be holding the office of president or acting as president during the term within which this article becomes operative from holding the office of president or acting as president during the remainder of the term shall be operative unless passed by the Congress during said interval. This was the FDR amendment made once Truman became in power, and it's the reason we're only allowed 2 terms for a presidency. Now, that being said, technically the max term served for a president is 10 years. This is because what happens is if you hold for just under half a term, then that is not considered your term. That is your predecessors. So you're allowed that plus 2 terms. However, if it's slightly over, let's say just 50, you get to serve 51% of the term, then that's counted as its own separate term. However, they added in a little caveat that allowed the current president, Harry Truman, to run for many offices. He could have technically became president for 5 terms. Even then, I'm pretty sure it would be a corpse, but he would be allowed to do it. Does not mean he would try that, but he was allowed to. Next, the district constituting the seat of government of the United States shall appoint in such a manner as the Congress may direct a number of electors of president and vice president equal to the whole number of senators and representatives in Congress to which the district would be entitled if it were a state, but in no event more than the least populous state. They shall be in addition to those appointed by the states, but they shall be considered for the purposes of the election of president, the vice president to be elected as appointed by a state, and they shall meet in the district and perform such duties as provided by the 12th Article of Amendment. Congress shall have power to enforce. What this means is that D.C. is now allowed to vote for president. It's still not a state, technically, but it can act as a state for the purpose of presidential elections, meaning they're allowed to decide their own election rules and all that. So fun stuff. So they got representation, just for president, none else. Amendment 24. The right of citizens of the United States to vote in any primary or other election for the president or vice president, for electors for president or vice president, or for senator or representatives in Congress, shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or any state by reason of failure to pay any poll tax or other tax. You're not allowed to charge a poll tax. So if you would, for example, show up to vote and they say, sure, you can vote, but you got to pay first, that is now illegal. Alright, next one's going to be a bit wordy as well. That's going to be fun. In the case of removal of the president from office or of his death or resignation, the vice president shall become president. Whenever there is a vacancy in the office of vice president, the president shall nominate a vice president who shall take office upon confirmation by a majority vote of the House of Congress, both houses specifically. Whenever the president transmits to the president pro tempore of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of the Representatives his written declaration that he is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office, and until he transmits to them a written declaration to the contrary, such powers and duties shall be discharged by the Vice President as acting President. Whenever the Vice President and a majority of either principal officers of the executive departments or of such other bodies as Congress may by law provide transmit to the President pro tempore of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives their written declaration that the President is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office, the Vice President shall immediately assume the powers and duties of the office as acting President. Thereafter, when the President transmits to the President pro tempore of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives his written declaration that no inability exists, he shall resume the powers and duties of his office unless the Vice President and a majority of either the principal officers of the executive department of such other body as Congress may by law provide transmit within 4 days to the President pro tempore of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives their written declaration that the President is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office. Thereupon, Congress shall decide the issue, assembling within 48 hours for that purpose, if not in session. If the Congress, within 21 days after the receipt of the latter written declaration, or if Congress is not in session, within 21 days after Congress is required to assemble, done by 2/3 of both houses, that the President is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office, the Vice President shall continue to discharge the same as acting President. Otherwise, the President shall resume the powers and duties of his office. So what this did, among another thing, was basically set the succession for the presidency and allow for the fixing of questions like, if the president is unable to perform his duties but still declares that they are capable, how do we deal with that? It basically made it a lot easier to run the government and have a stable succession, because if, say, the president and vice president died in quick succession, few people would know what to do. This helps solve that. So, next, the right of the citizens of the United States who are 18 years old to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or any state on account of age. The Congress shall have power to enforce by appropriate legislation. This allowed 18-year-olds to vote. Very simple. Alright, no law varying the compensation for services of the senators and representatives shall take effect until an election of representatives shall have intervened. So when Congress decides how much they get paid, it's not immediate. It happens the next election. Meaning, if the people don't like it, they can just vote you out and put someone else in charge. So it's a check. Now that that has all been read, I hope you understand the Constitution a bit more.